This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Fear of flying. It's a phobia that affects more than 25 million adults in the U.S. That's according to the Cleveland Clinic. And with recent headlines about crashes and close calls, pilots and flight crews say that number may be climbing. This hour, we're inviting nervous flyers into the cabin. We'll talk with seasoned pilots and a flight attendant about just how safe air travel really is, what turbulence actually means, and how to calm your nerves when your heart starts to race. Joining me now, Sabah Shahid. Sabah is a private pilot in Connecticut, currently working on her commercial license, and she's also the author of children's books, including My Mama is a Pilot. Sabah, great to have you back on Where We Live.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here today.
And also with us is Tom Bunn. Tom is a licensed therapist, retired Air Force officer, and retired commercial pilot for United Airlines. Tom is also the founder of SOAR, S-O-A-R, a fear of flying program that he began in 1982. Tom, great to have you on the show.
Thank you very much. I do hear a lot of responses from people you're talking about with the recent problems.
Right, and we'll definitely be getting into those. And for our listeners, let us know if you have any flight anxieties or stories that you would like to share with us. We would love to hear from you, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So Sabah, I want to start with you here. You've learned to fly actually during the pandemic. What first drew you to the cockpit, and what was that training experience like for you, especially during those times?
Yeah, great question. So my family was always a big advocate on traveling, and when COVID hit, obviously that was impacted greatly. At the time, I was also a new mom, so and I had just gotten back to work. So my focus was just, taking care of my son as well as just working. So I didn't really have any extracurriculars. And at the time, we lived really close to a local airport in Massachusetts. That's where I did most of my training. And we'd drive by the airport all the time, and I'd kind of hint at my husband, hey, one of us needs to become a pilot so we can continue our travel adventures. And lo and behold, one day he got me what's called a discovery flight. It's like your first exposure to becoming a pilot. You do 30 minutes on the ground and then 30 minutes in the air, basically just touching the controls. And yeah, from there, now it's been almost 4.5 years. And, the learning experience has definitely had its ups and downs. It's definitely an industry that is built on redundancy. It's built on proficiency. It's built on ensuring that, you not only know how to fly the airplane, but you know your systems, you know how to risk management, you know how to, handle the cockpit. As a pilot, you're not just flying the plane. You're looking at all your systems. You're talking to ATC. So there's a lot of different multitasking. And so the way the training is, built, it's to help pilots become proficient in all those areas, confident in all those areas. It's like once you get your license, you're not done, right? There's constant proficiency checks. Like as a private pilot, you need to have a flight review every 2 years, as an example. So you're constantly, your skills are constantly being tested. They're constant, and the industry through regulations are making sure that you are up to par, up to standard.
Well, and of course, you're familiar with traveling, both just as a regular human being, like most of us are, and also as a pilot. But did you ever? Were you ever a person with that kind of flight anxiety? Did the experience you working or having experience as a pilot help with that, or what was that like for you?
Yeah, great question. So as a normal flyer, no, I never experienced flight anxiety. I was always very excited to get in an airplane. But after becoming a pilot, where the anxiety, I guess, came was, through all the different learning curves. I'm sure any pilot that you talk to will tell you about a time where they just felt like, they just weren't progressing. That tends to happen. But then also when I started flying my family, that was a whole nother ball game for me. I feel I'm always a little bit more, anxious when my kids are in the back seat. Try to do, while every pilot going into a cockpit, you have your standard checklist that you have to go through. But it seems that it takes me maybe 5-10 minutes longer
Right.
when I know my kids are going to be in the back. So, and with that, being able to obtain higher ratings, has obviously helped with my confidence, has helped with decreasing that anxiety. And knowing that, I know my system, I know my plane, I know that ATC is out there trying to help me as well. So using all those tools in my bucket has really allowed me to decrease, I guess, that level of fear when I'm flying with my family.
Well, we are talking to another pilot. Tom, you spent a decade flying for United Airlines. What first inspired you to become a commercial pilot?
Actually, it was the end of World War II. The people who came back from World War II, who were the local heroes in the town I grew up in, they were the pilots. So I wanted some of that, that attention. So that's how I got into flying.
Well, nothing like a pilot spotlight here, Tom. What was your favorite part about the job? What was the process like becoming a commercial pilot?
Well, going into the Air Force, I was surprised I even passed the test. But once I got into training, uh, we had 250 hours of training in about 18 months, and then got to um, go into one of the planes that you'd fly in actual Air Force operations. And I was assigned to fly the F-100, which was the first supersonic jet fighter. And moving from the trainer into that plane was really shocking. It was such high performance. It landed at over 200 miles an hour. So it was pretty challenging. So I know you're talking about the challenges. And one thing that came to mind was the people I work with who are afraid of flying would be really impressed that you put your kids in the back seat when you're flying it. But this problem that I work with people is that they feel out of control when they're a passenger. And they've had some bad experiences, like most of us have, when someone else was in control. And then the other thing is, if something goes wrong, they can't escape. So when you put those two things together, they feel uncomfortable, or worse, even perhaps panic attacks during the flight.
Well, and then that's certainly something that we are going to be exploring throughout this conversation during this hour. And actually, Saba, when you were talking about when you're traveling with your family, I was kind of imagining myself. It's kind of not the same thing at all, but it's kind of like having your family in your car. And so that was my imaginings when you were describing the first time you flew your family. That's a different kind of anxiety. You're double checking your systems. You're making sure everything is checked off, and so it does change your philosophy, I guess, or your perspective a little bit. So I guess for someone who's never been in the cockpit or does have that anxiety as Tom is describing, can you walk us through, what's happening up there during a typical flight? And what do you tell your passengers before takeoff to keep them safe?
Yeah, 100%. So, before getting into the airplane, your pilots are doing checks inside and outside, right? There's pre-flight checklists, as they call it. You're checking all the systems, making sure everything's working properly. And, one of the things that as flying with my family, like on, bigger airliners, one thing that, I guess can cause anxiety is when you have little kids, rushing through the plane with all that stuff. One thing I love that the larger airliners, some of them do, is they allow for extra time, right? So in that time where the pilots are in the cockpit doing their thing, you're able to go in, get yourself settled, and kind of have that peace of mind that you're not going to have to fight through the crowd of people to try to get into the plane. And while we're doing all those checks, we're also talking to ATC, getting certain codes, right?
And when you say ATC, it means?
Oh, sorry, air traffic controllers, yes. So those are our eyes on the ground, right? It is just an extra layer of safety, right? So we're getting what's called flight following, and that's basically them giving us a code and being able to see our positioning in the air, assigning us a specific altitude to stay at, basically like a highway, right? So like when we're in the car with kids getting on a highway, you stay on that highway for quite some time. Same thing when you're flying. There's really, I would say, 2 or 3 phases of flight, right? Your takeoff, your cruise flight, where you're at your certain altitude, hopefully for a majority of the time, and then your landing part. So the way I like to describe it is, your takeoff and your landing are probably the two of the most eventful, where you'll feel, I guess, most of, most changes, turning and stuff, altitude changes. Sometimes your ears might pop. But when you're at that cruise flight, for the most part, it's pretty smooth, right? That's the goal of your pilots as well as ATC, is to help you find that smooth air so your journey is uneventful. Now, when you think about turbulence, when you're driving a car, if you go over a speed bump or if you go over, any type of pothole in the road, right, your car is going to move. You're going to jump around a little bit. It's very similar in an airplane. One of the things that's nice about when you do hit turbulence in a plane is your pilots know ahead of time and they give you a warning, right? Oftentimes you'll hear, hey, let's fasten our seatbelts. We're going to be hitting some turbulence, right? So you can mentally prepare yourself for that moment. Whereas in the car, sometimes it's just a surprise, right? You don't know.
Yeah.
So doing those checks, helps for a, positive flight all throughout. One of the things I know I always hear is once the plane's kind of taxied out of the ramp and is on the taxiway very close to the runway, oftentimes the plane will stop there for a few minutes, right? And I always hear people going, wow, why are we just sitting here?
Right.
But that's when the pilots are doing that final check, which is the run up, right? Making sure that systems are working at higher RPMs now. So there's no issues once that takeoff happens and you're finally up in the air.
Right. I mean, I'd rather wait the extra 5-10 minutes to know that we're safe versus why aren't we going yet?
Exactly. So there's so many checks, and that entire, I would say, pre-flight to taxi to takeoff can take anywhere from 20 to 30, sometimes 45 minutes, depending on what the checklist looks like, how complex the systems are within the plane.
And just a quick reminder to our listeners that we would love to hear from you. Ask our pilots your questions about flight safety. Give us a call, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So, Tom, I think we mentioned a little bit earlier that we've seen some news of crashes and airplanes mishaps recently. And I think a lot of people are wondering, is flying still safe?
It's actually gotten safer. It may be difficult for people who are not really very knowledgeable about statistics to think that this problem we had at Washington and then also in Toronto, it has changed, is a pattern, but it isn't. I mean, you can have runs in Las Vegas that surprise people, but in actual fact, every 10 years, flying has gotten twice as safe. There's a professor of statistics at MIT, Arnold Barnett, who for 20 or 30 years now has put out statistics at the end of a year saying your chances of crashing if you flew this year was 1 in 5 million or 1 in 10 million, whatever it is. Recently, up until just this year, he was saying that he really can't do those statistics anymore because we don't have any crashes. We went from November of 2001 until this year with no crashes of a major airline in the U.S. He says that flying is so safe that most people who don't deal with big numbers can't really conceptualize it. He says if you try your best to think about how safe flying is, you'll overestimate its risk. He says the smartest thing you can do when you think risk reward when you're flying, since you won't be able to really get it right, is to think of flying as absolutely safe, that there's no risk at all. He says you'll be very close to correct if you do that.
Well, that's a really interesting angle to sort of recalibrate our brains to think about traveling. What do you think, Saba?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. From what was just stated, the rate is 100% lower than, if you think about automobile accidents, right? I think also in today's day and age, there's a larger media presence, social media presence. So you're hearing about every little, accident that occurs, which we might not have been years ago, which also I think adds to people's anxieties, right? Because it's right there in front of you. I also think, because with aviation accidents, they're different from automobile accidents where, NTSB, where you're having your regulators come out on site to the scene of the accident. And sometimes it takes up to 2 years for them to research and really find out what the cause of that accident was. But then there's learning around that, right? Pilots are being trained about that specific incident. They're learning about it. So it's this constant feedback loop that even when an unfortunate situation does occur, we're still trying to learn from it.
And because earlier you mentioned sort of the process of flying. So you got your takeoff and then your landing or the major events. And I think those are the two events that people have concerns over, as you're probably familiar with.
Right.
And so we asked our listeners what makes them the most anxious about flying. And Stacy from Wallingford shared that the feeling of takeoff makes her nervous. So is takeoff something passengers should have concerns about, or, what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, what's happening during takeoff is you're basically going full power, right? You're waiting till your airplane reaches a certain airspeed, and you're basically pulling on the yoke and taking off. The way I like to think about takeoffs, which is something that if you're listening, other people can do, is with each takeoff for me, it's like I'm leaving everything behind, right? I'm now off to a new journey. I don't have to worry about anything that's on the ground. I'm so focused. Looking outside of the window, seeing how you're getting airborne, looking at the sky, looking at the clouds. There's a lot of different ways that you can distract yourself in those different phases of flight that might make you anxious. And so, and takeoff is so fast too, right? It probably takes in the bigger airplanes, 15 to 20 minutes to reach altitude. It's very fast, right? And you're basically just climbing up. You're going up.
Well, I think
let me throw something in for a
go
moment,
for it.
because the thing that happens for the people I work with who are troubled by takeoff is this. It's acceleration. When you're in your car to get on the highway, you accelerate for what, 10, 12 seconds? Now think of that as the standard almost everyone expects to feel when they're pushed back in their seat. When they get in the airplane, after 10 or 12 seconds, okay, that's it. We shouldn't be accelerating anymore. You're just getting started. The plane's going to accelerate for 15, 20, 25, 30, 35 seconds. And because it takes so long, and we never do that in our cars, passengers think there's got to be something wrong. What I hear is they are saying the pilots can't get enough power. And if we do get off the ground, the plane's going to come right back down and crash. So it's an illusion that people get because they're not used to accelerating for that length of time, that they immediately on takeoff can get into high anxiety or panic.
Well, and actually, that's you're reading my mind, Tom, because I was going to ask you, because another fear people have is planes dropping out of the sky. I mean, just to build on what you were explaining, Tom, is that something that can even happen? And what would cause the sudden altitude changes?
No, the plane, as long as it's got the speed it needs to support itself in the air, isn't going to drop. When you feel it drop in turbulence, it's actually flying down a little bit or flying up a little bit. You're going through the air so rapidly that when the air changes its direction slightly, as it does in turbulence, the plane responds and goes up or goes down a little bit. And it mimics the kind of motion you would have if you were falling. But the plane isn't really falling.
I think one thing to add to that as well is systems redundancy, right? So in any of the big airliners, you have multiple engines, right? Say one engine failed, you still have another engine. Your pilots have been trained to be able to fly that plane on one engine, and they know they've been trained how to land it safely as well. So, everything with aviation is redundancy. You most likely won't get into a car that has, two steering wheels or two gas pedals. And in aviation, you have that. And that's where that extra layer of safety is built in there. So, the likelihood of the plane just falling out of the sky, like we just heard, is very, very, very slim. But in the event of an emergency where there's an engine failure, there's checklists for that, and there's a procedure to properly get that plane back on the ground.
And I mean, on that note, Saba, as a pilot, I know you shared a little bit earlier, but do you ever get nervous during a flight? And if so, what are some of the situations that really put you on higher alert? I mean, you're already on alert, of course, but higher.
So I think for me, my level of focus just is so grand when I'm flying that I just really try to, keep my eyes on everything. So cross-track is something people may have heard of. It's a term where you're constantly looking at all your systems. And for the most part, I know as long as I've done my pre-flight correctly, my plane's in good standing order, I don't necessarily have that level of nerves because I know I've done what I need to do in order to have a safe flight. So that level of, anxiety decreases. A recent situation I can tell you about actually. This was just locally. So one of the things when you're flying in the clouds, right, there's certain regulations where you have to practice these approaches every 6 months to stay current. So I was up there with an instructor and we were going into Bradley. Going to Bradley quite often. But this was the day where it was saturated with so much traffic. Like there were big airliners, there were small airplanes, and they couldn't accommodate our request. So they said, we're unable to do it. So instead of, getting upset as a pilot, you always have to be thinking about, okay, what's your next move? Mm-hmm. What's going to be my alternate route now? And that's kind of what we did is we picked a different destination and flew that way. So I think when it comes to being a pilot and flying, you always have to kind of think one step ahead. You have to plan out what some of the emergencies or uncertainties can be. For me as well, one thing that always helps is kind of the night before a flight. I love to chair fly. I sit there, kind of imagine my cockpit, imagine the different motions I'm going to be making through the different phases of flight. And also just understanding what my plan for that day is going to be, like the night before, just allows me to feel that much more prepared and confident going into the flight.
Well, I want to thank Stacy for the question. And if this is helpful, because I find myself thinking about this every time or every other time I get a chance to sit by the window and watching out the window when I'm flying up, is the human feat is amazing. The fact that I can be up in the sky within 15 seconds kind of blows my mind a little bit. And we're going to be continuing this conversation after a quick break. You've been listening to pilots Saba Sahid and Tom Bunn. We'll be hearing from a flight attendant with insider tips for keeping passengers calm when the ride gets rough. Let us know if you have questions about flying or if you'd like to share your own flight anxiety. Give us a call at 888-720-9677 or leave us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. This hour, we're talking about aerophobia, or the fear of flying. We've covered the pilot's perspective, and now we turn to the front lines of passenger care, flight attendants. Joining me now is Lynn Van Oort. Lynn is a former flight attendant and a current flight attendant instructor and executive director at the Travel Academy. Lynn, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me, Catherine.
And so, Lynn, you've worked as a flight attendant for years before becoming an instructor. What first drew you to the role, and what keeps you passionate about it today?
Well, as the youngest of 7 children, our family did a lot of traveling, each to new destinations. Planning the trip was filled with excitement as well as the memories from those trips. So as a little girl, I always closely watched the flight attendants. They were always smiling, had graceful movements like fairy princesses. They provided coloring books, great snacks, and they were always there to help you. And every flight just was very magical. And being the great opportunities I had as a child, I started to feel that this is where I belong. This is where I want to be. I want to be up in the air, giving others the same comfortable, safe flight and helping others in any way that I can.
Well, I love that description about dreams of becoming a flight attendant. And because you just actually drew out a memory for me, I must have been 9 or 10 when I had an opportunity to travel by myself. My parents were with me, but they brought me to the airport and sort of hoisted me off to a flight attendant. But the flight attendant, it's one of those things where now I wish I can remember her name, but she gave me a little tour, and I felt really special because I got to check out the cockpit. And she gave me like a little pin, like I was part of the crew. And so that played a really big part of my sort of childhood flying memories that obviously has stayed with me since then. So that, flight attendants are, I think, way more than what you think, the services that they provide. But Lynn, I think that was like a really great description of what flight attendants do. And what was your experience like? Do you remember the first moment you were able to take your first flight as a flight attendant?
Very nervous. We went through the Excel 10-week training program on the ground. Your first flight, also known as your initial operating experience, very nervous. But you have to trust the training that you had gone through, that you can do this. It's okay to be nervous, but just continuing to go over the steps or the procedures or company policies to keep you on track to do your job at the best level representing those airlines.
And so now you're training new flight attendants. What do you teach them about supporting people who are nervous, nervous passengers?
Well, at our campus here in Minnesota, we do a lot of scenario role playing where we have passengers and maybe they have a little sort of situation that they're going to test out on a flight attendant. So this flight attendant comes in blind, not knowing what's going to happen. We're watching her movements, her body language, her tone. How is she answering those questions? Is she taking the passenger into consideration and listening to what they are really saying or asking for?
And I don't know if this is common today, but if a passenger is starting to feel anxious during a flight, is it okay for them to ring for the flight attendant to tell somebody?
Absolutely. We are there to provide that comfort and safety. And I definitely recommend anyone flying that is nervous to let that flight attendant in your area know. We have big hearts. That's who we are as flight attendants. And, we're going to keep things calm, collective, and professional. And we're referred to as grace under pressure. We have to have that outside composure, showing our confidence in demonstrating everything that we do in the cabin. So yes, definitely let your flight attendant know, even if you have a small hint of nervousness or anxiety during the flight. We're there to guide and calm you.
And listeners, let us know if you're scared of flying. What would you like to ask our experts? Give us a call, 888-720-9677, or leave us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So Lynn, what kinds of information can you share with a passenger in the moment to help calm their nerves?
Well, I guess the first thing definitely is bringing that calm personality conversation with that passenger, listening to what they are actually saying to you and sharing with you about the fears. So we definitely have to turn our active listening skills, showing empathy. It's okay to have anxiety. All of us, one way or another, have anxiety of something in the world, as you mentioned before, about going to a dentist. Maybe students going to school, taking a test. There's anxiety all over the place. It's how we handle that anxiety and bringing that forth to the people that can help you. We would definitely look at somebody having anxiety on the plane and possibly changing their seating assignment if we could. Normally, and Tom, you're the expert here on that, and Saba, normally a lot more turbulence is felt in the forward and the aft of the aircraft. So maybe reseating that passenger Uh, Also, finding out what works well for them to calm them. Is it keeping busy? Is it watching a movie? Possibly some warm tea, maybe reseating that passenger where there's an open seat next to them to give them a little bit more space, where a flight attendant, when she's not busy, can maybe sit and talk with them a while to calm them down if needed. Uh, we would always recommend, if you're have anxiety, not to sit at the window and look out the window. The cloud movement many times can make you dizzy and feel different um, items as well. So finding what makes them nervous, working together to create a answer of how we can handle this to best support that passenger.
And I know you're talking or training with more flight attendants today, but are you seeing more people are nervous about flying?
Well, I agree with the recent uptick with media presenting every little thing that is happening in the air lately. I do see that. I travel often myself. So I guess what I would like to share is, if the media presented to the audience every time that there was a fender bender, there'd be a lot less people that would want to drive cars. In an aircraft like both Tom and Saba shared, we go through regulated training and retraining. We have procedures, we have checklists. Flight attendants definitely work as a team, and we always know that we have the support and guidance of that pilot in the flight deck as well. So keeping them in tune to what's happening in the cabin is important as well.
Well, and then we've been talking a lot about what flight attendants can do to help calm nervous passengers. But what about flight attendants themselves? You're a human being as well. Do you ever feel nervous during certain flights? And if so, how did you manage your own fear while staying calm for your passengers?
Well, with the many flights I did in over 10 years as a flight attendant, I have been on different flights where there was higher level of turbulence. Mm-hmm. And knowing myself, most people know how to best calm themselves. As a flight attendant, we're told to, rely on our training, rely on our high level of training and what we can do. We're multitaskers in the air, whether you're in the flight deck or in the cabin. We all wear many, many different hats. For me, I review procedures in my head, any possible situations that may arise when there's turbulence. I would probably have a small briefing with my crew just to make sure all my crew members are feeling confident. Any questions or anything like that, we can use breathing techniques. We always try to refrain from as much caffeine as possible, and sometimes that can go the opposite way for you. So ensuring the calm atmosphere on the plane. Anytime there is turbulence, it is so funny. Passengers immediately try to connect eyes with that flight attendant, trying to read us and understand, ooh, does she look nervous? Is she sitting still? Is she acting normal? So our outward composure is so very important while we're in the cabin in these situations.
Well, I've never thought to do that. Now, the next time I'm flying, I'm going to start clocking that when turbulence happens. And speaking of a calm atmosphere, I do want to share a comment. Mary Beth, who's calling in from Colchester. Sadly, the audio is not that great, so I'm going to read Mary Beth's story. So Mary Beth shared with us that I have an adult child who didn't always have a fear of flying, but as a teenager developed it. The flight attendant really helped calm her down. One guy got really present with her, and he was talking to her peer to peer, and this helped her daughter a lot. Well, thank you so much, Mary Beth, for sharing your story, and appreciate that a flight attendant got to help your daughter. Lynn, any response to Mary Beth here?
Absolutely. We can't help what we don't know about. And as I said before, we have many, many hats up there. So we have the training, the de-escalation. We all share empathy with our passengers. You are our main focus. And as I'll share with some nervous passengers, that turbulence is nothing more than driving your car on a gravel road. On the freeway, you can make tracks. It's smooth. Now you go on a gravel road, there's potholes, as mentioned before. We're just up in the air doing that, and entrusting the entire team and the flight deck in their training, their qualifications, and being able to handle any situation that arises.
Well, we're taking a lot of notes here today on what to do next time we're on a plane. You've been listening to Lynn Van Oort, who's the former flight attendant and now training the next generation at the Travel Academy. Lynn, thank you so much for sharing your stories with us and your tips for helping nervous flyers.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
After the break, we explore why the brain panics at 30,000 feet and how to stop it. Let us know if you have any tips to calm nerves on a flight. Give us a call, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Flying is one of the safest ways to travel, but try telling that to a passenger gripping their seat during heavy turbulence. So, why is it so hard to use logic to calm ourselves down? That's what we're unpacking now with pilots Tom Bunn and Saba Shahid. So, Tom, mentioned earlier that you've worked with a lot of nervous flyers. First off, is there a difference between being an anxious flyer versus someone who has aerophobia?
Well, I don't know how people are going to define that.
Sure.
The main problem is some people are afraid the plane is going to not make it. Some people are afraid that they are not going to make it very well. They're emotionally going to crash. So one of the problems is panic attacks.
And what's actually happening in the brain when someone starts to panic during a flight?
Well, stress hormones are being released. And most of the problems people have with flying have nothing to do with the airplane originally. They're predisposing factors. Every time they've had a traumatic experience, it doesn't have to be a big one, all the small ones add up. But the average age that this hits is 27. And it generally hits out of the blue, not because of anything that happens on the plane. But we've had so much history of bad things happening to us when we were not in control ourselves and when we could not escape, that we get more and more and more sensitive to not being in control or able to escape. So typically it can happen in an elevator. You get into an elevator, you push the button, and you control doing that. But once you've done that, now the elevator takes control. At that point, if you have had a history of situations where you got into trouble when you weren't in control, now your mind is going to release stress hormones. And when you release stress hormones, one of the things that happens, they talk about the fight or flight response. There's an urge to escape, and you can't. So then you release more stress hormones because you are trapped, and you have your first panic attack. So what we have to do, based on some research that's come out recently from the Salk Institute, is we have to look at how the mind is causing us to react to no control situations, to no escape situations. And it's code. When we have a bad experience, code is produced in the brain that's going to release stress hormones when that's repeated. So what we do in the course that I operate is we show people how they can change the codes from negative stress hormone releasing codes to positive codes, the kind of codes they would get if they were hanging out with a friend. So we literally do that. We look for someone who, when they're in their presence, they feel truly at ease. And we then, while imagining being with that person, imagine walking on the plane, sitting down in the seat, the door closing. So we want to take the signals that come from that friend's face and from that friend's voice and from that friend's body language or touch, and take those positive signals and attach them to the things they're going to run into when they walk on the plane and sit down in the seat and so on.
So it sounds like bringing in an emotional support travel buddy in your brain.
Kind of. You're taking the positive signals from a person who could be your travel buddy, but they don't have to be, but you're bringing them along with you inside you. You made them portable as a support.
Love a portable travel buddy. In fact, I was just sharing with both Tom and Saba too that I did have a recent traveling experience, and this is just anecdotal, but I did realize or just notice that there are a lot of people, adults and children, who are carrying plushies. And so I'm wondering if that's maybe our response to the need for something comfortable when we're traveling. Saba, I don't know if that's something that you've seen or doesn't make sense for you.
I know for, having any type of object that'll make you feel comfortable and at ease is great. Like, for example, my son loves bringing a stuffed animal with him anytime when it's just him and I in the smaller plane, and he'll usually he had this huge sloth actually once. Probably, literally kidding.
Does that count as a passenger, though?
We do put his seatbelt on, so I think he would count as a passenger. But, having that extra friend per se, has made him feel at ease before. I know, there's people that bring blankets. There's people that bring books. There's people now that bring their iPads, which is technology can be accessed after a certain elevation in the air, right? So there's a lot of different ways to kind of distract yourself when you're flying and to help calm those nerves.
So we're going to open it up here a little bit. We've been talking a lot about the desire to control. And so that desire to control anything you possibly can when you're feeling out of the control seems to really resonate with a lot of us, especially with one of my colleagues, our technical producer, Dylan Reyes. Let's take a listen to what Dylan shared with us.
When we first started thinking about the concept of this show, I really had to ask myself, do I get anxious while flying? It's hard for me to tell because I fly a lot more than the average person. Before I settled down here and graduated college, I used to freelance a lot, like flying 3 weekends out of the month a lot. Constantly flying is sort of a form of exposure therapy, but when you have friends in almost every arm of air travel infrastructure, it's hard not to think about what can go wrong. In an effort to make myself feel better, I flood myself with knowledge. When I get to the airport, I already know whether my plane is there or not. I have my seat number memorized. I already know the National Weather Service forecast for ATC.
Good morning, here's your pre-duty weather briefing for Monday, August 18th.
Forget flight numbers. I know my plane's tail number. I can tell you what runway we're landing on at Bradley based on how we turn over the Madison VOR, whether we're going to be on the Bradley 6 or the Coastal 9. My seat becomes a battle station. Flight radar is open. I've got all the statistics the Flighty app can give me. I'm not popping the music. I'm listening to ATC.
Settle down, Captain Happy.
And then sitting in my seat last night, flying back home, the answer came to me. Yeah, this probably means I get anxious flying.
So we're laughing here not because of your pain, Dylan, but because we hear you, and I can attest, Saba, that Dylan knew all my flight information when I was traveling the last couple of times. So I felt extra secure, actually. So actually, I'm just realizing live right now that Dylan is my travel buddy.
There you go.
So what are your thoughts of Dylan's admission here?
It sounds like he's trying to become a pilot.
Technically, he is the pilot because we call our operations the cockpit. So he is flying this plane.
That's right.
So to speak.
No, so I mean, everything that he described is kind of what, the pilots are doing in the cockpit while they're flying. It definitely sounds like there was some anxiety there. But I love that recap of, everything you kind of touched upon. I think you mentioned going to the airport, right? Knowing your flight information, your seat number, all of those things are great, right? It can actually help set you up for success, right? Getting to the airport early, I always recommend that. I always recommend smaller airports as well because there's less traffic. There's, smaller moving parts while you still have to go through TSA, go through security. It's less of a line. You can manage that better. You feel like you're more in control. Some other things that, can be done, TSA pre-check is an awesome tool. Doesn't cost that much, but it'll prevent you from having to take your shoes off, for example, while you're going through. Researching your airline is very helpful as well. Some airlines, like I think I mentioned this before, if you're traveling with small children or if you have a disability, you're able to board early, things like that make a big difference and kind of help you feel in control, right? Because you know what the next step is. Choosing your seat ahead of time is great as well. Again, another aspect of your control. I know like before kids, my husband and I would just be like, whatever, we'll just get assigned a seat.
Right.
Now we make sure that we pick our seats so we know that we're going to be sitting with our kids and we have, a preferred area of the flight that we want to be sitting in. So anything that you can do really to prepare yourself for those moments of, getting to the airport, getting on the plane, and then managing yourself throughout the flight is going to help you have a more pleasurable experience.
So I want to share another comment here. Donna, who called from Glastonbury, Donna shares with us that she flies frequently back and forth to Florida. I'm not particularly fearful, but my tips with takeoff and landing is we tighten my seatbelt to the max. It helps me stay in the seat and stay secure. I put my feet on those metal bars, and that helps me feel secure too. I also like when the pilot comes on and says, we're hitting a few bumps. Don't worry about it. We're going to get out of it. So, Tom, sharing Donna's story here sounds like she has some pretty good coping mechanisms. Are these little tools a good way to sort of help keep the nerves down?
Well, I like that she's being proactive about it rather than just saying, there's nothing I can do. A person who does have more of a take charge attitude probably is going to do better on the plane. There may be limits to it. The people that I've worked with usually have trouble ultimately with not having the control be 100%. And it can't be. Our most basic way to control our feelings is with our feet. When you're a little kid, before you learn to walk, you have to rely on others to take care of you. But once you can get on your own feet, you can walk over towards something that's interesting to you. Or if something's concerning you, you can back away from it. So that's pretty basic. And the problem is that we get so that becomes one of our main ways to control our feelings. Use our feet to go toward things that are interesting, back away from things that are threatening. And the plane takes that away from you. So when the plane takes off, if you're still at low altitude, you might think, well, the ground's still right there, so we could get back to where my control is very quickly. But as the plane goes higher and higher, the passenger gets more and more divorced from the platform that gives them control, the earth. Now, when you get up high, oftentimes people say, I wish the pilot wouldn't say we're at 35,000 feet. I'd rather not have that in mind. But if it is night, or if you're in clouds, you can't even see the ground.
That is
now
true.
It becomes a problem because although logically the ground exists and you're going to get back to it, hopefully, you can't see it. Emotionally, it's not available.
Well, hopefully we came up with a list today to help our anxious and nervous passengers to prepare for your next flight. You've been listening to Tom Bunn, who's a licensed therapist and retired commercial pilot, founder of SOAR. Tom, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
And also Sabah Shahid, who's a private pilot here in Connecticut. Thanks for coming back on Where We Live.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Chloe Wynn. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. Thank you all so much for listening, and happy, safe traveling and happy flying, everyone.